they've changed.
Noelle, how do I hand off to somebody? Oh, there you go. Make a host. I'm handing it over to you.
Okay.
And you should have it. So you should be able to share your screen and do the slides.
Okay.
There it is.
All right. And somebody's coming in. All right. Nope, I don't want to do that.
All right.
There it is. All right. So, in order to start all this off, Angelo and I were kicking around some ideas, and we realized that, you know, there's a lot of anatomy and physiology that comes into play when we deal with our emotions. And so therefore, we started putting this together. And as I started digging, I'm going, my gosh, I remember back when I was in basic nursing school that we spent almost a month just on the brain alone. And he looked at me and he says, you got to keep it smaller than that. And I says, I realize that. So that being said, I'm going to do my best, and I probably will speak a little fast. And I apologize for that. So this is kind of where we're going to go. We have some facts. We're going to talk about the anatomy and physiology, how the emotions are formed. We're going to briefly talk about neurotransmitters and end up why the essential oils are used and why they work. And as Angelo said, please hold your questions to the end. So I found this quote, and even my professor, Dr. Marilyn Daly, she was a great neuroanatomist and traveled throughout the world speaking about the brain. And she says, it is the most studied organism, but yet we know very little about this. And again, Lu Chen, who was a PhD in November of 2006, said, we know very little about the brain. So validated that thought. However, we have talked about emotions for a very long time, and it all started with Aristotle back in the 4th century BC. And Darwin did some updating of the thinking of that time, and he did that in 1872. And then with Freud setting up that whole psychotherapy, it created an expansive list. However, there is an ongoing fight of just how many emotions there are, and we'll talk about that in a few more slides. Then in 1982, we had this concept of neuroimmunology, and that's going to have implications as we go forward because we realize that our nervous system is impacted by our immune system and vice versa. And this will also have implications on our emotions. Angelo, I think I sent you one that anger affects the immune system, which then triggers off the possibility for cancers and heart attacks, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
All right. So one of the things that I found very, very interesting, now, if you were to look at the brain, if you were to cut my skull off right now, lift that up and look down in, it's pretty fascinating. But if you actually touch it, it's kind of this gelatinous pudding mess. So it's nerve cells, fat, water, but it's gooey, all right? But we process informations depending on whether the brain cell is a fast transmitter or a slow transmitter. And as you can see, we transmit information between 78 to 267 miles per hour. So that's pretty impressive. And we process about 6,200 thoughts per day. And it's estimated that 70% of those are negative. So we're wired to be in a very negative world. That's kind of saddening when you hear that. So let's start taking the brain apart and going layer by layer. And so this if we were to open a person and pull their brain out, so where my highlighter is now, that would be the front side of the brain. This would be the top, this would be the back of the brain, and this would be down at the bottom, and the brainstem coming out and becoming the spinal cord. Now, as you can see, each one of these lobes has a certain function, all right? Most of our functioning or discussion is going to be talked about this prefrontal cortex, which is in the very, very front part of the frontal lobe. Now, each one of these lobes will have some importance as we go through, and we'll highlight that as we go through. All right, so real quickly, are there any questions? Have I lost anybody yet? All right, I like silence. In this case, silence is good. All right, now, the big areas that become involved with the formation of emotions are these three big areas. And with
are you getting the request?
Yeah,
yeah, just
yeah.
quick. That's part of the host.
Yeah, I understand that, and it's now move guys over there. All right, so let's start with the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is this purplish pink triangle area. Now, this area is responsible for planning, cognitive flexibility, and working memory. But however, this eventually is going to have impact on how an emotion is formed. Underneath that is the orbital frontal cortex, all right? Now, this is linked to the limbic system, and we'll talk about this in a moment, but decisions are based on emotions. And so this region is going to blend the emotions with our external world, the stimuli that comes in from our various senses, sight, hearing, touch, taste, etc. And it's also going to it's also important how we interact socially. We're going to find out that culturally, not everybody has the same emotions, and that's partly due to this region here. Now, coming down to our green hexagon, which is the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. So what does that mean? Ventro meaning towards the bottom, medial towards the center of the brain. So this structure is very deep centered. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to look at past experiences and integrate them with what is currently happening to us. And it's going to help form a response. What's interesting is courage, compassion, shame, and guilt are most associated in this region. And this region of the brain also tries to suppress our negative emotions. And if this region becomes damaged for whatever reason, a lot of people become the negative Nellies, and they have no positive outlook in life. So that's a concern for us. Now, as we've said, our emotions are dictated also by our senses, all right? And so various regions, this region of motor cortex is going to cause us to move, but right in this region is where touch becomes involved. And touch is going to relay down information. This area, Wernicke's, is part of speech, and it's how speech is interpreted, all right? And then when we go to speak, that's where Broca's area becomes involved. Now, if this area of the brain becomes damaged in Broca's area, we often are going to slur our words, or there's going to be a stuttering. It's that motor side of things. There is a lot more information in the handout of how these regions play in the formation of emotions. So again, we're going to refer you back to this handout quite a bit. Now, in the back part of the brain, this visual cortex area, realize our eyes are here. And so we have this very long nerve, the optic nerve, that comes back to this region. And this region then interprets that stimulus, and then it sends up to the visual associative cortex to interpret this, and then it ties back down into the limbic system, and we get an emotion. So lots of things occur simultaneously, all the while with the limbic system also bringing in these three regions of the prefrontal cortex. All right. So we keep hearing about the limbic system. What is it? All right. So we have this oystery shape type structure right here that I'm circling with my arrow. All right. Now, while it is mostly associated with movement, it does integrate the emotions and motivation and cognition. So it's kind of a big blender. Now, so, beside, and around it is this another oyster-like structure called the thalamus. Now, this thalamus is responsible from an emotional standpoint, as it has many functions. It's going to receive input from all of our senses, all right? And it's going to decipher what's going to happen, all right? So it's a strategist. And it's the relay station to other brain regions for emotional formation to occur. So as it gets information, it's going to start throwing information up into those three previous regions that we've talked about. Now, the hippocampus, which is this structure right here, kind of looks like a large overgrown purplish worm, all right? It's going to evaluate current input as well as past experiences, and is going to evaluate this. However, the granddaddy of them all is this green structure right here, and it is bilobe. So there's one on the left hemisphere and one on the right hemisphere called the amygdala. Now, this is very important to us because decision makings and emotional response are filtered through here. Any new input that comes in is immediately sent to the amygdala. And if it is recognized that this is something dangerous or threatening to us, it's going to set off that fight or flight response. And some people, it is so overwhelming, it paralyzes them. Remember the Wernicke's area. It will tie into Wernicke's area, and there are times that people are saying stuff, but the information is not being heard because the brain recognizes it as being harmful or damaging, so it actually turns our hearing off, which in some ways is good, but in other ways it's very, very bad. So some people may have expressed something that I didn't hear that. And it's because the amygdala has sent down and shut down the hearing aspect of our brains, as an example. I guess another way to think of the amygdala is as a smoke detector, all right? And we know that people who have problems with post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD, this is highly, highly focused into this region, and because it has malfunctioned, so to speak. All right. And unfortunately, as much as I enjoy the discussion of PTSD, that is well beyond this series and definitely tonight's programs. So let's take a look now how an emotion is actually formed. All right. So back in 1970s, there was a psychologist by the name of Paul Ekman, and with his studying of people, he has identified six basic emotions. And over the years, other people have come up with how many emotions there are. Some of them are hybrids of one another. And as I said, in 2017, which is the last published count that I saw, for the most part, there's 27 different categories of emotions. And there was one reference that said that there were over 34,000. Now that one I find a little bit too extreme. The 27 kind of seems to be more doable. Now, in the readings that I've done as a nurse practitioner, I kept saying this name Feldman Barrett come up time and time again. And it's like, okay, who is she? Well, she is not only a psychologist, but she's also a neuroscientist and also dabbles in anthropology. And she came up with these 5 basic tenets of emotions. 1, emotions are not hardwired into the brain, as some of previous psychologists have said. They cannot be detected physiologically, which I found very interesting, because then it kind of throws in the concept of, can you outsmart a lie detector? So that's why some states have said lie detectors are not of value. They are culturally oriented and not universal. As I said, with her studying of various cultures, she found that some regions of the world do not have the same emotions that you and I might experience with the same stimulus. Now, there was a point in time where some early psychology books after the 1970s started saying, oh, in this part of the brain, this is where we're going to have sadness. In this part of the brain, it's going to be joy, et cetera, et cetera. And with the advent of PET scans, MRIs, functional MRIs, we found out that that is not true. The whole brain is actually involved in our emotions. And it's not a reaction to an external event. And this kind of like made me sit back and start scratching my chin. And what she is saying here is, you can experience something as very sad, but yet you can project that you're having a very positive response to this. So the question is why? And again, it's bringing those front 3 regions of the brain involved. And what else did you have by the sensations and how they were interpreted, and ties in that whole limbic system. So a lot of information was there. Any quick questions?
Just keep going, Sean.
All right, sounds good. So how this occurs, all right? So you have to have a sensory stimulus occurring. So whether that be a sight, a smell, a touch, a taste, or a sound, something has to happen. As that comes into our body and up into our brain, that input, even though it is hardwired to go to the specific part of the brain that's responsible, it's simultaneously going to start tripping off some things. So the hippocampus gets activated, and it's going to look at both the short-term memory you've had with that sensation as well as long-term memory, and evaluate, what was the outcome? Was this a positive effect? Was this a negative effect? Or was it a All right? The amygdala also comes in, and it immediately is deciding, is this life-threatening or not life-threatening? If it is, it's going to trip off a whole different cascade of systems. If it is non-life-threatening, it's going to allow things to go through at a more leisurely pace. And those prefrontal regions that we've talked about before, being the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the orbital frontal cortex, and the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, all is going to process and determine how is this emotion going to come about. so that's a lot, all right? Let me take a look at my notes here. All right, so again, how does this happen? Remember the speed, because some of these are being processed at 70 miles per hour and some at 267 miles per hour. And so, yes, it's lightning fast. But how does that occur? It's all based on these neurotransmitters. So how does a neurotransmitter work? All right, so on the left here is an example of two neurons. So you have one neuron here, one neuron here, and at some point in time, they have to have a junction, all right? And at that junction, there are chemical messengers that come down, get packaged, released, and as they released, on the other side, there are receptors that pick up this chemical messenger and then send it down through. Now, some messengers are immediately degraded by an enzyme, and some are allowed to stay for a period of time. And again, going beyond the scope of this program, this is what's happening between neuron to neuron. However, let's talk about these are the big players of neurotransmitters that are involved. And there are many, many more. There's one catalog that says that there are about 40 different neurotransmitters. However, to go through that would be another 3 to 4 hours, as Angelo said earlier. We're going to just focus on these. And these are the ones that are going to keep creeping up in the future presentations that we do. Hence, this is why we highlighted those. Now, you've probably heard of adrenaline, a noradrenaline, or maybe epinephrine or norepinephrine. Now, while these are mostly found in our adrenal glands and are part of that fight and flight response that we've talked about, the brain does manufacture some of these to a smaller degree. Now, adrenaline is primarily or epinephrine is the fight or flight response. However, it does create heightened awareness to make sure that our brain is functioning at that high state. Concentration is augmented with norepinephrine or noradrenaline. Now, as we start moving down, the pleasure hormone, when we start feeling good, is all responsive to dopamine. All right. It also is highly associated with addiction. All right. So if we have an addictive personality, we probably have higher levels of dopamine to us. It also can involve, dopamine is also responsible for movement. So when we start having lower levels or degraded levels, we start to see disease processes such as Parkinson's as an example. Now, if we have something that feels good to us, we're going to do it over and over again. If you remember back in our general psychology class, the mice, that every time they panged on the bar, they got some kernels of food. Well, hey, that was very positive for them. And so they did that. And we realized that, hey, there's a chemical that's causing this, and it's all due to serotonin. Dopamine. Serotonin, on the other hand, is our well-being and happiness. It sets the general mood, all right? It also is going to help us with sleep cycle and digestion. And so it plays a major role in calming things down. What blew my mind out is that 90% of the serotonin that is manufactured in the body comes from our intestines. Now think about that for a moment. How many times have you heard Elaine and Angelo talk in previous sessions that we've had about our gut biome and how important it is? And this is why having a good functioning gut is so important because serotonin is one of the major players in our mood and our emotions. Now, we need to calm down, all right? So right now, your body is starting to release out more and more levels of GABA, all right? And it tells those nerves, all right, it's time to chill out. So let's calm down, all right? However, if we need to become hyper-focused on something, burst of GABA is going to come out because it does help us to hyper-focus. And this is one of the things that we see being disrupted or having excessive production in those that have ADHD disorder. All right. We also see that people who tend to be very anxious, all right, have lower levels of GABA because, again, it's all about having that balance, a word that Angelo and I have heard many times in our education as EMS practitioners. We have to have homeostasis, all right? And that's that balancing of things coming out. Now, acetylcholine is the main transmitter across all the neurons. However, it is most associated with learning, all right? And if we have decreased levels, we tend not to learn very, very well. It also plays a major part on causing motor neurons to fire off. It also, acetylcholine is associated with our awakening cycles. So as we start to come out of that sleep early in the morning, if you follow the traditional get up at 7, go to bed at 9 type routine, acetylcholine helps to start awaken. So when your body is on a rhythm, these levels are going to start to rise, and so it helps us to wake up. Now, glutamate is associated with memory, all right? And it's a very common neurotransmitter, and it also plays a secondary role with learning as well. So it's going to tie in with acetylcholine as well as the norepinephrine or noradrenaline. And so the last one is endorphins. And this is our euphoric neurotransmitter. Now, where this often is typically released is during exercise, excitement, and during sex, all right? And the other thing that endorphins are known to do is help decrease pain. So we have all of these neurotransmitters that at certain times of the day are increased and other times they're decreased. So there's this whole balancing that goes on. So neurotransmitters, very, very important. If we don't have them, the whole system falls apart. Now, there is another protective, we think of the skull as being the big protector of the brain. And there's also the meninges that we've been talked about. And if you've ever heard of the term meningitis, we know that this is bad. But there's yet another layer that is now protecting those neurons called the blood-brain barrier. And there are these cells that are very, very tightly put together. And it is the body's last layer to protect the brain cells from getting any noxious substances or bad substances into them. So the analogy that I like is the blood-brain, tongue twister here, the blood-brain barrier is much like a bouncer in a VIP setting, all right? Now, there are some substances that tend to dissolve well in lipids or fats, and because the brain is very fatty, they're allowed to pass a little bit more freely. So they have the VIP card. if any of you were alive during Reagan's attempted assassination, if you remember, his press secretary took a bullet to the head. And part of the problem is that his brain was falling down and it was killing him. So what they did is they took sterilized beef tallow or beef fat and structurally put that in there, and it prevented his brain from falling down on itself and compressing itself, and hence keeping him alive. And that set up a whole new set of research into why does this work so well. Again, a little bit beyond the scope of this program. However, things that are lipid soluble, such as gases, such as our oxygen, which is important for all cells to function, as well as carbon dioxide. We've talked about steroids, or we've heard about steroids being used. This is important. And so therefore, they have the pass card, and so they can freely move in and touch all of the neurons. Now, many of our psychoactive substances, such as alcohol, nicotine, and barbiturates, are highly lipid soluble. So that's why we get those immediate hits. And this is also why those substances are very, very difficult to break if we have that addictive substances. Nicotine is one of the most challenging drugs to become unaddicted to. And I never realized why until I started seeing this. Now it makes sense. Now, substances that are dissolved in water, such as glucose, or electrolytes, such as sodium, potassium, chloride, calcium, they need an assistance to get in. And so it's also size. The larger the molecule becomes, the more challenging it is. So if you are this water soluble, such as glucose or one of the electrolytes, you're going to have to pay a little bit more, and you're brought in on a hand cart. Now, if it's something that's very large and clunky, such as a protein, then you're going to have to use that freight elevator that is towards the back of the club. Now, and this is like your larger proteins and your antibiotics. Now, some are just so structurally large that it's like, sorry, you're not coming in. And this is why certain things become a challenge to treat, such as cancers. You have to create or engineer the processes of these chemicals to be able to penetrate this blood-brain barrier. So the question is, why are essential oils so effective? Well, let's find out. First of all, they are lipid soluble. In itself, oil, it means that they are a lipid. And so therefore they have that VIP pass. And structure becomes very, very important. Now, we're going to hear over and over again that as we move through this series, that the essential oils that have terpene structures, particularly the sesquiterpenes, that's a tongue twister. Terpene means that they have 5 carbon units. They are very effective. However, the sesquiterpenes have 15 carbon units. So you're thinking, oh my gosh, 15 is very large. But the way they're twisted, they are the most biologically active in the brain. And Angelo, if I remember, they're 20% more effective than just a straight terpene. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe that's the number we came upon.
Yeah. So one of the other things is that with essential oils, we're finding out that some, if you're a terpene or sesquiterpene, you're very active. But we know that there are other essential oils that are also active in the brain. And it's like, but they're not a terpene or a sesquiterpene. They are of other things. And what we're finding out is that they have the ability to modulate that blood-brain barrier. And so how I think of this is you're passing that tip, that $100 tip off to the bouncer. He turns his head and allows you in. All right. So we know that if, essential oils can be brought in the body by three means. We can inhale them. And what's very interesting is the fact that as we inhale these oils, such as putting some of the oil in our hand, rubbing together and bringing it up to our nose and inhaling it, or we diffuse it, however we bring it into the nose, those receptors are always looking for these essential oils. And any oil that or any aroma that is very laden in oil tends to be picked up very, very quickly by the receptors in the nose. And because it has a very, 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 very short mean to getting into the brain, boom, it's almost instantaneously effective. Now, we also know that if oils are applied to our skin, any areas that have larger pores, such as our hands, and more importantly, our feet, are quickly brought in. Now, yeah, we can rub it to the back of our neck, and maybe 10, 15 minutes later, we're seeing an effect. However, the reason that there's a little bit of a delay is because it first has to be absorbed through the skin, and it is very effective because our skin likes things that are fatty or oily because it is more nourishing and helps the skin absorb it very quickly. All right. But then, all right, now it's gotten through that skin. Now it has to be transported through the bloodstream up to the brain and then go through this whole bouncing system. Are you a friend or are you a foe? And lastly is that of ingestion. Now, the first thing that has to happen is if we take it in, how are we taking it in? If we're dropping it in underneath our tongue or pushing it, putting it on our thumb and pushing it up into the hard palate, we have blood being picked up, much like how nitroglycerin works. If we put it underneath our tongue, there's lots of blood vessels there and we'll rapidly absorb it and take it there. That's great. However, if we're putting it in a gel cap and swallowing it, now that capsule has to be torn down by the gastric juices. Is this oil going to be altered by the pH of the stomach juices, or as it moves over into the small intestine, does the bicarbonate change it? And if so, that's a problem. And hence why we have found out the turmeric duo caps. They are specifically designed to release at certain points in time to make sure that it is most optimally absorbed throughout the rest of the small intestine. That's great. That's one part of the problem. The other part of the problem is, what does the liver do? Does it, through its processing, affect it? And if not, then it is picked up by the bloodstream and transported. So sometimes by taking things by mouth, are we allowing it to absorb very rapidly and picked up by the bloodstream? Or if it is in a gel capsule or a compressed tablet, as some of our essential oils are, how long does it take to go through that whole absorption and first pass through the liver and then be dumped into the bloodstream, and then eventually winds up hitting the brain? So in summary, there are a number of things that go into play into creating an emotion. And we've learned that various regions of the brain have a say in this, and it's not just one pinpoint location. And as our understanding evolves. Even though the brain is the most studied organ of the human body, we still don't know a lot about it. And we have seen over centuries that our understanding has changed. Emotions first picked up in 4th century BC with Aristotle, and here in 2017, we're still seeing challenges that occur. And so that's what makes this really, really amazing and impressive, of how much has changed over the years. And we're so fortunate to have essential oils. And people from many, many years ago, the Egyptians and the Chinese, knew the value of the foods that they ate. And while they didn't appreciate the oil capacity, they just knew that things happen positively or negatively depending on what they ate in their diets. And then modern science came along and started to tear down. And I'm sure Elaine's sitting there rubbing her hands saying, oh yeah, this is my area of expertise now. And we started to see that there were these things called essential oils, and they started to have, we started to see very interesting properties. And so now we see and have started cataloging that certain oils have positive effects, or in some cases negative effects. And so I'm very blessed to have Angelo, and I think it was also Sharon Brenizer,
Yeah.
Brenizer, introduced me to the essential oils. And so here we are. And we're awesomely excited that you guys are here to see the rest of this emotional series.
Cool.
So that's what I have. Any questions?
All right, Sean, if you want to unshare your screen.
Yep, I'm going to stop sharing.
Goes back. And you guys can unmute yourselves. We'll go back to gallery so we could see everybody. So, wow, that was a lot of information in 45 minutes or less. And some of that may not make sense yet. We're going to tie more of this together as we go along with each of the different emotions that we talk about. I think what I pulled most out of this was the different neurotransmitters that are involved in this, and we're going to definitely talk about those and almost all of the emotions that we go from this point forward. But a lot of information. I appreciate you guys just hanging tough and kind of absorbing it all. I'm sure you guys got questions. What questions do you guys got? Or are we all really smart now and ready to be brain surgeons?
I see in chat that Noelle, unfortunately, she had to run, but she was very appreciative that it was a fantastic overview. Okay. And super excited for this. Great for this awesome foundation.
Very much so.
Question for you, Sean.
Yeah.
And actually for Angelo too. First of all, thank you. That was amazing. I loved everything that you said. The neurotransmitters, all of the brain stuff is fascinating to me. And, you know, and I've been using essential oils for probably 20 years. Joined doTERRA in 2014. And since then it's been more therapeutic. And I was resistant to the idea of the emotions I have EMT certification in my background, and for me, it was all about the physical. And then some things started cropping up that I could no longer ignore the emotional part of the oils. So I'm wondering, two questions, I guess. Do you use them in practice, like clinically, to manage emotions of patients? And the second question I have is, before I forget it, you mentioned detrimental effects of the oils in certain cases. Do you have any examples of that?
So there are some oils that, and Angelo, feel free to jump in as well. There are some oils that just don't hit everything. While you see an oil is supposed to be good for condition X, when you go and you use it, you don't see that positive effect come through. And that's what I really like about oils, is because there's oftentimes more than one outcome. I was stumped with, I'm known in my trailer park as the witch doctor because it's like something. But unfortunately, there was a gentleman that is a friend of mine, and he is sick with this infamous COVID. And the initial started looking at some things, wasn't working. And it's like, okay, why? This should be working. So I switched some of the other oils, and hey, he started getting a very positive effect. So that's when we say detrimental effects. Not every oil is going to respond in the same person the same way. Right. And that's what I think is so great with essential oils, is that if option 1 doesn't work, we may have option 2, 3, or 4 in our back pockets. Angela, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, Gretchen, I was reading some reports on some stuff when I was doing a little bit of research on ADHD. And it seemed that for that particular issue, there were certain occasions where the oils would have the opposite effect, where you would think lavender would be calming and peppermint would be invigorating. They had the exact opposite effect. And so somebody that had ADHD, you're actually giving them peppermint so that they will rest and go to sleep, which sounds totally wrong, but that's just the way the chemical reactions were working within the body. I had my oils with me on the back of the ambulance when I was riding in the back of the ambulance. I came off about 4 years ago, but let's just say it wasn't part of our natural practice. However, if I felt I needed an oil while I was tending to my patients, I may get some out and apply it to myself. And we all know the residual effect, and that person would actually get some benefits from it too. The most common oil I used in the back of the ambulance was probably lavender. And you can figure out why. Just help keep them a little bit more calmer. But I don't know of pre-hospital wise of anybody using them clinically. I do know, as you know, probably that there's a handful of hospitals that are using them clinically wise. So not so much pre-hospital.
Yeah, I know for myself, in the beginning of the pandemic, with myself as the health officer, thank goodness for the adaptive rollerball. And there were a couple people I was working, and they going, you know, when I'm around you, I just feel so much better. And I says, here, take a whiff. And they go, ooh. And I says, all right. So Laura, a lot of times she says, you know, Sean, I'm feeling really stressed today. It's like, all right. And she assumed the position, as we said, and back behind the neck. I would roll adaptive rollerball one, and that's how we got through our days. So awesome. Yeah, my practice is very helter-skelter. I'm not employed as an NP right now, but I am boarded in family practice. And like I said, there are a couple of people that migrate to me. And so I'm practicing tangentially.
Okay.
But yeah, I've used them. Neighbor, she had massive abdominal surgery, and she says, I don't know how I'm going to get through this. She says, my biggest thing is I don't want to take the painkillers. So did some research, generated some pain protocols for her.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions? All right. You guys were fabulous. Vicki, did you find the answer to your question about the blood-brain barrier? Hopefully you'd got it. Okay, cool. Great. I don't see any other questions in the chat. So guys, thanks for joining us tonight. We'll catch up with you again on March 1st, where we're going to talk about anxiety and depression. I've already canvassed you, a lot of you folks on some stuff. So getting some really good information on that. Really looking forward to bringing that information together and sharing it with you guys. So until next time, thanks for showing up. Sean, thank you so much for giving your presentation today. I think it was
very informative. Thank you.
Yeah, it was
Thank
huge.
you. You're welcome.
Almost too much for me to digest.
Yeah.
But
Can you get
Yeah.
pre-diluted as well from doTERRA?
I'm sorry?
Can you get chia pre-diluted and pre-measured so you don't have to dilute chia at all? Can you
yeah,
get
they
that
do have a
pre-diluted?
cheer rollerball. They do have cheer touch. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Very much.
You're welcome.
Thank
you're
you.
welcome. We will see you next time.
Sounds good.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.
On.